Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV and a new week. Some great content coming your way. A double bill today. Stephen Fisher is on later in a few hours' time talking about the attack on Westerham on Sword Beach on D-Day. But anyway, from Netherlands to Poland, Denmark to Belgium, women of the S.O.E. set Europe ablaze. My good friend Dr. Kate Vigurs' latest book tells their story and is a follow-up to Mission France. Links to buying the new book are, of course, in the description below, or you can find it at your favorite bookstore. So without further ado, I'll bring Kate in. Good morning, Kate. How are you today?
Morning. I'm very well, thank you.
So we were just talking about S.O.E. and the remit sounds quite clear at the beginning, set Europe ablaze, but actually the tasks and organization they did had a real broad remit. And we were just talking to you. I had Richard Duckett on last week talking about S.O.E. in Burma, where they end up being sort of advisors to infantry units, which is very different to when we think of the agents in France and Belgium. So when you tackle a book like Mission Europe, the remit of what S.O.E. covered, what point does it get to the point where you feel, well, that kind of no longer feels like S.O.E., that starts becoming something else? How do you keep it within a kind of a confined realm?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you're right, it does change. We say set Europe ablaze, and I'm always very clear. It's sabotage and subversion. It is not spying. But then, of course, you get the ones who are spying, and then you trip yourself up and you realize that you've made a bit of a moot of yourself. It's not spying per se. There's a bit of intelligence gathering going on, but certainly within Europe, it is quite clear that it is about slowing down the German war effort or stopping it as much as possible. And mostly that's through industrial or rail sabotage. But of course, there are other things that happen. I know you and I have discussed in great length something like the debacle on the Vercors Plateau, where S.O.E. promised they're going to arm the resistance and help them, and that help doesn't arrive, certainly not in the numbers they wanted it to. And the way that it aids countries across Europe differs massively as to the way that the war is being fought in each country. And that's something I became very, very aware of very quickly in writing Mission Europe. It was going to have to be done by country, not the loose chronology I used in Mission France, because every country's experience is different, from all out, almost annihilation in Poland to the Danes. They use the word cooperate. They don't use the word collaborate. They cooperated with the Nazis. And it's so different. So S.O.E.'s remit is different in each of these countries as well. So it's a lot more broad brush than setting Europe ablaze.
Another thing I think I want to tap into is the motivations for individuals who become S.O.E. agents, or they work behind the scenes for S.O.E. They probably didn't know, some of them, the machinations behind the scenes, and there are these political aspects going on behind. There is this sort of, as you talked about, the Vercors, which I know is France. We're not doing France today, but the S.O.E. agents may have had a different personal understanding of what their role would be, but there's sort of orders coming down. Well, no, they're sort of pawns to some extent of a larger sort of geopolitical situation that I'm sure when they're doing all the rough and tumble stuff of training to be an agent, they're not really certain that there's all that much going on behind the scenes, because at the end of the day, it was a secret organization. Now people like yourself have uncovered all these secrets and things behind the scenes, but at the time it seemed quite pure what they were doing. I'm using my language. I'm using the fact I was Belgian, I was Dutch ancestry, whatever it would be. And I'm going to go there and I'm going to make a difference to the war. But actually, it's more complicated than that.
It is. It is. I mean, it comes across as very idealistic when you look into certainly the women's motives as to why they want to become S.O.E. agents. I should put in a caveat here as well. Not all the women in my book were on S.O.E. missions. It starts to get complicated. They had S.O.E. training. But for example, a lady called Trix Terwint was going to be working for MI9, so for escape and evasion. And SOE were going to train her, infiltrate her, and look after her for the first 24 hours of her mission before she was sent off to MI9, which didn't happen. But yeah, going back to it, some of them did know the lay of the land in the countries because they'd come directly from them.
Yeah.
So, for example, Elżbieta Zawadzka comes out of Poland. I made that sound so easy. It took 4 attempts. It just took and months. But anyway, she comes out, and she's got quite an immediate knowledge of what life is like in the general government under the occupation. So her knowledge is then used to help other agents understand what is going on. But you know what it's like, somebody tells you something and you don't, it doesn't really register, you know, it's like, yeah, that's your experience. I've got I've got my own thoughts and whatever. So I wonder how these agents felt or how much they believed of what she was trying to tell them. Likewise, Trix Terwint, who I've just mentioned, is immediately out of the Netherlands. So she is informing people, here's my Dutch for you, the Engelandvaarders, who are the people who escape the Netherlands. Some of them have been out quite a while, and there's machinations everywhere. It's a nightmare. You know, you can't have him and you can't have her, and I've got this organization over here, and it's really complex. And I know you said we're not talking about France, but there are 2 chapters on France because everybody focuses on F, but there's R, there's Republique Française.
Right, yeah.
And there's 2 other sections as well. So France is really complicated. How do you find the right section for you? And normally, because the other section have said no. So it's very complicated. And like you say, big political stuff going on around it.
Yeah, I mean, and France, you know, when you were on before and you've talked about that length, and people probably watching this have a little bit more of an understanding about, as you say, F section France generally, but that's sort of where the ideas for lots of things began, because it was France that the Allies are beaten out of in May and what have you, 1940. But it seems to me, from what you're already saying already about the agents from the Netherlands and Poland, is that rather than fitting an agent to what they're already thinking they want to do with agents, it's more about how can this agent, how can we utilize the skills of this agent in the best way, because they have got sort of varying backgrounds and ages and specialities, and this is where again it gets complicated again with, as you're saying, MI9, S.O.E, resistance, these sort of blurring of the lines where people could end up being on the fringe of several types of means of taking the war to the Germans, but not necessarily neatly under the category of, well, your boss is.
Yeah, that's definitely the case within the women outside of F section. Is there's all sorts of different ways that they can be utilized. And I think you're right that this person has come in, they've gone through their MI5 clearance, and MI5 have probably highlighted that they are, I'll use Trix as an example again. She sticks in my mind. I don't know why. They said she was a plucky little patriot and she should be sent back to the Netherlands immediately. So they have identified her as being the kind of person. And these people have come to the UK primarily in quite extenuating circumstances. So Elaine Madden, for example, she comes out after in the evacuation of Dunkirk. She flees across Belgium with her auntie. And that in itself is a remarkable story. And then they end up at Dunkirk and they're like, oh, they're only evacuating the military. So they borrow some greatcoats and a tin hat. And it's as they're climbing down the ladder, the skipper says, those are ladies' ankles. And they let her on anyway. But these people have already proved themselves in the way that they come out, or the work they've already been doing, which isn't necessarily the case with the women of F section. You do get a much broader narrative as to why they're joining the organization. And like you say, the lines blur, and I'm finding myself wondering where the delineation is. For me, it always used to be that an agent had to have official S.O.E training. But does that mean that we don't count members of the resistance who worked alongside an S.O.E circuit? Do we not count them as S.O.E simply because they didn't go through this 4-stage training program? It's a question. I don't know the answer yet.
Yeah, no, you'd end up finding that it would just get complicated. You'd go, okay, if we use this set of criteria, this person doesn't fit in.
Yeah.
If we use this set of criteria, this person doesn't fit in. That doesn't seem so. It's the boundaries get complicated. The other thing I think that you must have discovered when you're starting to write about more than one country is the German occupation wasn't the same from country to country, depending on what they see as a vision for that country. It can be more brutal. I mean, obviously we think of Poland is more the kind of the extreme brutal occupation. Norway, perhaps maybe towards the other side, but then people may argue and say, no, it was quite brutal. It depends where you are. But the nature of the occupation then affects what S.O.E. and the government then think could be possible to achieve there. Because, I mean, you might have a part of a country where I don't know, there's no industry or there's no train lines running through. So that then that can't be part of it there. So what can we be doing it? So how did S.O.E. kind of write down, I bet they didn't, but did they write down at any point, here are the priorities of the things we must be working on in country A, country B, country C? Because that would have been a godsend to you as a writer. I bet they didn't. I bet they didn't.
If they did, I haven't found it. But that's not to say I've read every document in every archive. Yeah, like you say, the German occupation is so different, and Poland, rightly the right example there. It's so brutal, roundups the minute that they're occupying, whereas you get other countries, Belgium and France put up a fight, at least. Norway puts up a massive fight against the Germans. They've got a good 2 months of pushing back against this occupation, and how the hell you occupy somewhere like Norway is beyond me. I've just come back from Norway and I spent a week cruising the coastline, and I wasn't even halfway up the country. So to occupy something on that scale, and then you have the likes of Denmark, who were occupied, the invading forces arrived at the same time, and Denmark had rolled over before most people were even out of bed. So that then does influence how the resistance are going to work. If they want to resist, some of these countries, it takes a while for the resistance even to start to build up. How is the resistance going to work, and what's it going to involve when it does? And an overriding theme in my recent work is escape and evasion. It's helping Allied soldiers or airmen who have become trapped to get out. That seems to be the overriding aim of a lot of this stuff. Even the women who come from Mandate Palestine, who are going to go back into Eastern Europe, their missions are twofold. But one half of the mission is get the Allied airmen to safety, because we need them. We hear it again and again, don't we? It's so long to train them, and they are so valued. And prisoners of war and persons of interest need to be helped across the borders as well. But that seems to be the overriding thing. And industrial sabotage, yes, it does happen, but maybe not as much as France. And it's
interesting what you said about the getting back of airmen, because I always think as well, a part of that is also, if you're flying long distance missions in whatever it is type of aircraft, if you know there's an infrastructure in place behind the scenes that's trying to get your buddies back, it gives you a little bit of comfort. It doesn't change the likelihood of whether you're going to get shot down or not, but you don't want to be thinking that you're just being sent off willy-nilly to other countries, and if you get shot down, that's it. Stuff, you're on your own. So it's not just the pilots they bring back. It's the comfort it gives to people who are flying those similar missions.
Definitely. So there's a huge morale boost, isn't there, with something like S.O.E., even though the people of Britain apparently didn't know anything about it. And I do think that's true. It was good in the occupied countries to know there's somebody on your side, to know there's somebody trying to help you. And like you say, and then the same with the Allied airmen, they know there's somebody in those territories who, if the worst happens, they will hopefully be helped and can get home and fight the war that they've been trained to fight.
Okay, so we'll talk about some of your favorite S.O.E. agents from the book in a minute, but you talked about them having the clearance, they've been checked, they get trained, all the things that need to be done, and despite the fact they arrive from different places and come with different levels of knowledge about the war, so to speak, there comes a point when you then have to insert that agent back into the country you want to send them to, which then means trusting people when you're there. And this is, in some ways, we talked about last time, not the fatal flaw with S.O.E, but it's the big risk is to get anything done, to get sabotage done, to build up an intelligence page, to do anything, you have to rely on other people. And the thing about other people in an occupied country is you just don't know what pressures they're on, which relative they have in a prison, and what they've been told to do, who they're working for, who they're not working for. And the S.O.E masters sitting in London or wherever they are, having to try and understand the safety of a certain city. Okay, let's take Antwerp, let's take Warsaw, whatever it would be, to know who people can trust, because that gets really complicated. And obviously there are successful stories and there are terrible, tragic stories where agents just didn't come out alive because someone shot them, someone, the network they joined. How difficult is it to kind of retain as a historian objectivity when, you know, because you get to like these agents, they become like members of your family, and then they're betrayed by someone, but sometimes that betrayal is done by someone because their partner is in prison or something. That must get complicated with the emotions of understanding why people make decisions.
Yeah, definitely. And I have a lot of that in Mission Europe, a lot of decision making that it's easy for us 80 years later to sit and judge and to say, you know, they were a traitor. How could they do that? But in a lot of these situations, there's one in particular where she's just horrible and self-serving. But in some of these situations, you're right. There's a much bigger picture to all of it. Every person involved in these stories has their backstory as well, and stuff that's going on for them. And yeah, it is hard to remain objective. It's and you're right that you live with these people. You know, they live in your head for years while you're writing about them, and then suddenly you give them to other people and hope that they have the same feelings that you do. But it's hard. It's very hard. And certainly when you get stories of treachery or somebody does something, there's one of the women is infiltrated into Hungary, and as they get into Hungary, a policeman or a Arrow Cross guy comes towards them, and one of the guy just loses the plot and shoots himself in front of this guy, in front of the Arrow Cross, which is then saying, well, these two are guilty. Because you know, he's taken the extreme decision to kill himself. What are the other two hiding? And you will never know why he did that, what he was frightened of, what personal baggage he was bringing with him. And that's what I find fascinating. I love the bigger story, the facts and figures and everything, but these individual stories and then individual motives, you can really get into it and try to understand people the best you can.
I want to tap in now to the how you measure the success. And Richard Duckett was on, I said last week, and he said about, I forget which quote he gave, but whoever it was said, the Burma campaign was where the S.O.E was at its best, but you could also argue that it was doing a different role there because it was sort of an advisory capacity with Karen, indigenous people and things like that. But one of the things about whenever you get into agents, whether they're S.O.E, O.S.S or anything, is that bravery doesn't necessarily get you the results you're wanting. People go into these situations with all this incredible intent of doing something, but it doesn't happen. The sabotage doesn't happen. They don't get into the place. They don't do the but the story still remains tragic. How can you rate the exploits of these different individual agents? And because some of them absolutely did get the decorations, they did do things, they did, the factory was blown up, they did but some just have these sort of tragic experiences of the worst of what can happen to you as an agent. How do you measure that? The results?
It's so hard, and I don't know how you can measure it. I remember one agent saying that if you were caught, you had failed, and I don't think that's necessarily true, because some people were caught, they were betrayed, or there was a roadblock that wasn't there yesterday when the recce was carried out. That's not, to me, that's not a success or failure thing. Were missions successful? Was industrial sabotage successful? Well, that's really hard to quantify as well. I mean, you can quantify each individual act of sabotage, but then how it adds up to the greater war effort is very difficult. And with S.O.E, the dreadful thing about it is reprisal. So if a factory is blown up, or if a high-ranking German officer is kidnapped, the reprisals can be huge. Hundreds of civilians can be rounded up, deported, murdered, as an act of retribution. So how do you weigh that up? Was the stoppage of the German war effort in that particular place for that particular time worth all those human lives that may otherwise have been saved? I mean, for me, it's D-Day. That's how I measure success. And I really do believe that had it not been for the resistance doing what they were doing in the interior of France around D-Day, it was Buckmaster, who's not somebody I would normally want to quote. He's not the most reliable of men in any way, shape or form. But he did say if it wasn't for S.O.E and the resistance, the Allies would have been pushed back into the sea on D-Day. And one of the women in my new book, Jeanne Boeck, she was on your title thing. She helped prepare for D-Day. She was only 23. She helps prepare and show people how blowing up railway lines can be a success. It's just different. It's different for every country and for every mission. Is unifying the resistance enough, like in Greece, getting the different factions to work together? Is that a success?
I mean, and
the jury's still out.
These are rhetorical questions to which there's no
they
answer.
all are.
But it is this idea of sowing a seed of optimism, sowing a seed of there is something there, because you're in one of these occupied countries, and you particularly don't feel very brave, or you've got a family of 7 kids or something, so you can't go out and risk. But there's of something happening down the road. You hear of a rail line being blown up or something. It does it give you hope? Does it give you? I mean, I was reading Gavin Mortimer's SAS in France book recently, and again the same thing happens there. Successful operation, reprisals, and then villagers dragged out of their houses and just shot in town squares, things like that. And you think, okay, that's tragic. And then you look at the number of bridges that got blown, or the number of railway lines, and that sounds quite good. But then you realize how quickly the Germans got them repaired again. You go, okay, so
that's the thing, isn't it? They rebuild so quickly because they've got the wherewithal to do it and the manpower. So you put out an electricity plant, for example, which stops everything, but it only stops it for a few days. Is it really worth the reprisals on the back of that? As I said earlier, I was in Norway recently and talking about Operation Gunnicide, the destruction of the heavy water plant. Now, MRD Foote quite famously said, if S.O.E did nothing else, the debt of humanity is owed to those men who blew up the heavy water. And it's not really until much, much later we realized the Germans were nowhere near getting an atomic bomb. But at that moment, that was the big thing, that they knew there was heavy water, they knew what they were planning, and they were able to stop that in its tracks, again, with human loss of life.
I think that brings up a very good point about the fact that these things, we can now look at it contextually, and we can say, okay, here's what S.O.E is happening, here's what the bomber campaign is doing, here's what Ultra is doing, here's what so-and-so, and we can add it all up and say all these things together are significantly affecting the ability of the Germans to wage war, and they're improving the chance of Allies to get victory. But at the time, if you're in an S.O.E office under Buckmaster, you don't necessarily know what Bomber Command are planning or what Bomber Command statistics are. You only know your bit. So what you're trying to do is make a difference with your bit. And all of these things made a difference. And even if it wasn't a big difference, and it seemed less of an important now, 80 years on, they still made a difference at the time. And I think we talked about it last time, that the reprisal aspect is obviously very tragic, but S.O.E at its peak is a few hundred people. It's not even half a division, is it? So it's not a massive, great expenditure on the part of the British government. I mean, it was. I'm sure it was expensive. You know what I mean? But it's like we might as well do it. It's not draining money that's going into bombers. It's using a different type of resource. These individuals that you write about, how else would they have served the war? How would the 23-year-old girl have, so what they're doing is they're doing something. And so going back to the various countries you wrote about, is there one of the countries that you feel S.O.E. got more right, not got more right than wrong, but had more success than failure?
I think Denmark is the one that fascinates me. Excuse me. Sorry. Denmark, it's quite interesting actually, because they don't let the Danes who are sort of in control, they're known as the princes. They don't tell them that there's a difference between SIS and S.O.E. And one of the first women involved is Jutta Gru, who is a bank clerk, and she's friends with Ebba Munch, and they start working very, very quickly. But she doesn't tell the people in control there's a difference. And what is interesting about Denmark is the wireless communication is second to none. Right. The way that they work their wireless operators in comparison with any other country it's incredible. A wireless operator wasn't allowed to carry their own set. They weren't allowed to set it up. So they would literally arrive at the safe house. Everything's ready for them. They would transmit and they would go. Whereas in France, they're trundling around with their suitcase. They're trying to set it up, get the aerials up, send their message. It's all on one person. And what Denmark do is spread it out. So they employ lookouts and so on. And they're very, very careful about who they employ and how they do it. I mean, obviously, there's always going to be bad eggs in the basket, unfortunately. And they also actually redesigned the wireless set. So instead of lugging around this ridiculous size suitcase, a guy called Deuce Hansen, who works for Bang & Olufsen, redesigns the wireless so it is the size of a telephone book, which is an old comparison these days. People might not remember the yellow pages, but that's what we're talking about. And they also have a base in Sweden, and they set up wireless links sort of that bridge rather than trying to go the whole distance. So they said, I just think Denmark really had it made. They were organized, they were efficient, they learnt from mistakes, which a lot of sections didn't do. So yeah, I'm quite impressed with Denmark so far. And
that leads me to then ask you then about, well, I think we talked about it last time as well, that the S.O.E. has a tricky start, and then things get better and better. And I'm thinking particularly about France, and the same would apply, I'm sure, with Richard Duckett in Burma as well. Is that with regular combat, with a new anti-tank gun, for example, it's being used by hundreds of people at any one time. So the 17-pounder, for example, goes into action in Italy, it goes into action in Normandy, and so information about its strengths and weaknesses can be filtered back, analyzed, and they can say, okay, it works best at this range, it does this at that, and then quite quickly there can be a better set of instructions issued. With the relatively few number of S.O.E. agents spread over the distances they were. So you said that Denmark got its wireless situation cracked, yet in other countries they didn't. So you must have been thinking, if only that information could have gone back and they could have somehow said, okay, right, we've got a new system here, and spread that information around. It's like the war would have needed another couple of years for S.O.E. to get to iron out all its cracks. By 1947, things
would be perfect.
but the irony is they've ended up helping to shorten the war, but in the same time, it's come too late for them to perfect things. And you see that with things like the O.S.S. that had lots and lots of problems, but the CIA that comes out of it years later is perhaps a Mark II version. So the S.O.E.
definitely
is a great idea that nearly got to its peak, but probably didn't quite, despite everybody's best intentions.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think another couple of years, not that we would have wanted that, of course, but another couple of years would have seen it learn from its lessons, improve on them, and work out what needed to be done moving forwards. Excuse me again. The other thing is, I think we've maybe got this idealized view that there's Gubbins in control and everybody reports to him and everybody listens, and each section, you know, we have a European meeting every Monday morning. That just doesn't happen. The country sections don't really enjoy speaking to one another. There's a lot of tension literally just between the country sections, never mind them bringing into the MELD Secret Intelligence Service as well. So SOE, it has a tricky start because it's not given the autonomy straight away. Wireless traffic goes through SIS to start off with. So it's not given the opportunity to start the way it wants to go on. So yeah, does it ever reach its full potential? It's hard to say. And then of course you get these tragedies going on, like the Netherlands, that nobody in the UK, well, they said they didn't know about it. Yeah, give it a few more years and it might have been all right. Now, you made an interesting point about CIA as well, because of course we don't know if any SOE agents went on to join MI6, because MI6 files are locked.
Right.
So we don't know what happened. So it's most SOE agents that I can trace left, well, the organization closed and they just went back to whatever else they were doing. But were lessons learned from SOE? Don't know.
You have to think.
That's a hint at the MI6 algorithms to open the files.
Have to think information would have passed on. You know, you have to think that things would have got better. But so you kind of alluded to this tragedy in the Netherlands, and you know, and that is for all the plucky, amazing women you write about, there are unfortunately there are tragedies all along the way when you get to SOE's history. So you said Denmark got its wireless situation cracked. Is the Netherlands where it kind of went the worst in some ways?
I think so. Yeah. So what happens in the Netherlands? Sorry. What happens in the Netherlands? The first agent. I'm cutting a long story short, so I'm not going to go through every single agent. But a guy called O.S.S was a wireless operator who was infiltrated. And after a couple of months, he is arrested by a man called Gisgis of the Abwehr. And Gisgis gives him an ultimatum, really. He says, I can kill you, or you can use your wireless set, act as if you're still at liberty. I will tell you what to send, and you will operate your wireless set under German control. But London won't know about it because it's still going to be you tapping away. And Lauers thinks, I'll do it because SOE will know that I am captured. More to the point, at this point, they put 3 random letters at the beginning and end of each wireless message. So Lauers chooses his letters very carefully. And at the beginning, he put CAU, and at the end, he put GHT, in the hope that anyone listening would work out that he was caught. But they didn't. And what happens is Gisgis tells Lauers, you ask for more agents, more equipment, more money. And they start to bring them in. And if they're wireless operators, they are given the same ultimatum. And they all agree because they all think London are onto it. And also Gisgis has promised them that he won't execute them. He will keep them safe because they have played his game, the Englandspiel, known as Operation North Pole. Anyway, one of this just keeps happening and keeps happening. They're all kept in Haren prison, which is a seminary building, and then they're taken back into The Hague to do the wireless work. Trix Terwint arrives. Now, I mentioned Trix to you earlier. She was going to be MI9, and this is where it's critical. SOE training, SOE infiltration, first 24 hours, she's an SOE agent. Then she becomes MI9 and she's captured as she lands. So she's captured as an SOE agent. and she is treated the same. She is put into prison. And then on the 1st of April 1944, Gisgis sends a message to S.O.E, April Fools. I've got you. I've had you all along. I've got all of your agents. I can't remember the exact quote, but something like, if you're thinking of paying us a visit, don't do so without our cooperation. So he says, you've been cooperating all along. Thanks so much. With the game being up now, Gisgis' protection of these agents is gone. So they're all deported. Trix ends up being deported to, she spends 2 days in the Orania Hotel, which is a resistance prison. Then she's deported to Ravensbrück. From there, she's deported to a sub-camp of Mauthausen. And she's eventually liberated. She survives. She's liberated from Mauthausen. At Mauthausen, 48 S.O.E agents are murdered. 6th and 7th of September 1944, they are murdered. I can't even say executed because of the way it was done. Trix didn't know that. Anyway, 5 agents survive out of this whole Englandspiel thing. So S.O.E then has to work out, do we start again? Do we start the Netherlands section, N section again? And they do. They do start it up again. And then they send other female agents as well, Frankie Hamilton, Jos Hemmeke, and they do rebuild it. They're like a phoenix from the ashes. They sort of come out of this mess and rebuild. But it's a hell of a mess. It really is.
A hell of a mess. But they obviously must have seen then the merit in having an organization there. You know, it comes back to what we were saying earlier, that it seems a small part of the war, a handful of agents in a country, but to re-establish something after a tragic incident like that, they must have decided there's more to be gained out of having agents there, despite the risk, than not going back in there. So, you know, we're back to that question about how do you add up all the achievements and reconcile it with the loss of life. And that kind of comes down to the people, isn't it? Because the people that volunteered, they have to know the risks. They may not know the specifics of it. They have to have been told this. You know, I mean, you'd have to be an idiot to not know that going back into a country operating for the enemy of the occupied country is high risk. So that they do know what they're going in for.
Yeah, they do know, and they are told. You know, they know they're operating beyond the protection of the Geneva Convention for a start, because they're going in civilian clothing. Get a few examples of uniform going in from the Palestinian Mandate Palestine side. But they are in civilian clothing. They are working behind enemy lines. There's this whole thing about women shall not bear arms, which again means they're beyond the protection of the Geneva Convention, if that's what they are choosing to do or being told to do. And then you've got things like the Commando Directive. Now, I don't know how well known that was. I don't know if the great British public knew about it. And certainly the other part of that, the Nacht und Nebel. But agents were told, you know, your chances of survival are about 50-50. A wireless operator going in at the height of the war, I guess in the preparations around D-Day, was 6 weeks. But if you're young and idealistic, you'll go, that's fine, but that's them, that's not me. Well, that's certainly how I would think, because I've always been a bit, you know, it won't affect me kind of thing. So I wonder if there was a bit of a naivety among some of the agents. But then again, those who'd come out of the occupied countries knew what was going on, and they knew what the punishments were like. They weren't naive in that respect.
I mean, this is like why people would volunteer to jump out of aircraft, why people would do it. The naivety of youth. You know, the 56-year-old me looks back at the 19-year-old me and think, what the fuck were you doing back then? You know, why are you such an idiot? You know what I mean? So that naivety. But I think I may have asked you on the Mission France one, is that, you know, we talked about these disparate group of people. They often are idealistic. They're obviously incredibly brave. They have to be intelligent to be able to do this. Is there another uniting factor of that that may be a positive and also a negative, like recklessness, because recklessness can be both a negative and a positive. You know, in the studying the people, and you know, your scope was much broader for this book because it wasn't, you know, you did a bit of France, but it was much wider. Is there a uniting factor between these women that you say that's the quality they all had?
Recklessness is a really interesting one because I'm just thinking about it, and a lot of them made very calculated decisions. So I'm not sure if recklessness comes into it in some ways. Some of them, there's a bit of, you know, gung-ho, Jan Boeck and her handmade explosives. You know, she was clearly very, gung-ho. I can't think of another word. Patriotism, I think, is an overriding factor. Anti-Nazism. But no, everybody's motive and everybody's personality is different, and that's what I find so fascinating. You get very bubbly, outspoken people. Hannah Sanesh, I would say, was one of those. She keeps a diary, she writes poems, she's very open in her feelings, she's very honest. And then Trix again. Trix is a social recluse by the time that she is brought into the resistance. She is away from everyone. I would hazard she was having not a breakdown, but just wanting to withdraw herself and recoup in a way that didn't really happen, or certainly wasn't talked about in the 1940s. I think she just wanted to step back, and then she was given this opportunity, and she was like, "Oh, hang on, you know, maybe I can." And Mathilde Carre talks very openly about the fact she wants to commit suicide, and she might as well do it in a useful way as throw herself into a river. So she throws herself into the war effort. Wow. So it's really, really interesting. What is the overarching thing that all these women have? And I think it is a passion to save their country from oppression. I think that's the overarching thing. Now, hang on, though, because we get to Mandate Palestine, and those women, they have already left Europe for a better life, to be part of Eretz Israel, to set up this new world, and then they're called back to their old world. And for them, they are aware of the deportations. Everyone's aware that stuff's happening and the anti-Semitism that's happening. And Hannah Sanesh says, you know, even if I don't make it, the Jews will find out I tried. You know, at least one person tried to save them. So for her and Haviva Reich and Sarika Braverman, I think there's an idealism that comes with it as well. We can change the world, and we can do it on our own. So, yeah, thanks for that question. I don't know the answer.
No, I don't think any of us know the answer. So then, I want to move now to the fact that I think we've talked about it before, that you get into the 1950s and 60s, and as you said right at the beginning of this, they're not spies, but that's when spying became the big thing. It was James Bond, and even the war film Operation Crossbow about the V1s and V2s became a Bond film in all but name. And then you had that absolute plethora of books. Anybody who'd been involved in spying or sabotage or deception or whatever, you know, they all just did a book, didn't they? All the pop-offs and all those kind of people. So obviously you are a proper historian who spent proper time in the proper archives looking at what was actually said at the time in the archives. But that raft of books that came out at that time, did it damage in some ways what people understood that the real organizations got up to, what S.O.E. and MI9 got up to, because of the spy sensation era of everybody was out there, you know, creeping in the shadows and saving the world from destruction?
Yes, I think it did cause damage. However, it was reacting to the immediate post-war period and giving people what they needed, which was a reason for fighting the war in the first place, other than the obvious, of course. But, you know, people were still subject to rationing. People were getting used to having their father, their brother, husband back, who'd been away for 5 years or so. People were getting used to, you know, rebuilding bombed out cities. People needed a reason. They needed something to look up to. And these books, I think, gave them the heroes and heroines they wanted. Bearing in mind that the Official Secrets Act should have been enforced for a lot longer than it was. And everyone always says, oh, you know, I found out that my 95-year-old auntie was a cipher clerk at Bletchley. S.O.E. didn't stick to that. I remember there's a quote from Haviva Reich saying, oh, must you print a book? But S.O.E. had gone. You know, Bletchley then goes on to become other things. S.O.E.'s gone. The war's not going to be fought. If there's another war, it won't be fought in this way. So what's the harm in telling the S.O.E. stories? But the official files were in a state of flux. They were not publicly available. So these stories are based on a little bit of hearsay, interviewing other agents, you know, building up this picture. What I find now, 80 or 70 years later from these books and films, is if you dare to try and unpick something that was said, you're the baddie. I'm finding it on Facebook all the time at the minute. There's lots of AI generated stuff that is just wrong. And I've spent 20 years trying to get it right, and some boss in a computer's making something up. So the damage has been done. That's what I'm coming at here. Now, the reason that certain agents are famous over other agents is not contrived. It's not their fault. It's who wrote the books. You've got the gazetting of the decorations, you know, and some of the gazettes are public, of course. So they'll be in the newspapers. You've got names going out in war crimes trials. You've got the work of Vera Atkins becoming public after the war. So there's all sorts of things that have added to this misunderstanding, and like you say, this kind of spy passion that's going on as well. So yeah, it's something that a lot of us are up against, and there's a lot of hero worship as well. I've only seen one review of my book, which is a hint to anyone who's read it. Go and review it, please.
Yeah, please go and review. Everyone review
if you like
books.
It. If you didn't, don't, because loose lips sink ships and all that. But
you touched on earlier. They're idealized to some extent. They're patriotic. But one of the things that I think that you don't do with your books, but it must be a hard balancing act, is you don't want to over romanticize the whole thing, but you have to leave enough in there to make it appealing to people. When you do book talks, you do your work at history events and things where you do your SOE character kind of thing, you can't, to some extent, you've got to play a little bit on the cliches, the kind of the Sten gun and the beret and the little white socks kind of thing. But at the same time, you've got to move away from that, because that's what people know. So you have to draw them in with that, and then okay, now here's reality. Because you know, with both your books, you don't want people to just read it and get so depressed. Oh God, another one who got killed. Oh, and she got tortured as well. Okay, you want to have some optimism that this was all worthwhile. So you know, we're back to the if understanding as a historian what the SOE achieved is complicated, then deciding how to then put that in a book to keep it balanced, so that people, you know, don't throw it against the wall and go, oh my God, I'm so depressed now. How did you achieve that?
Just seen a comment, a low looms large. It really does. It really does. Yes. So there are certain so through my acted stuff, if anyone's seen that, there are cliches. That's a decision. I remember doing the talk with you and Alex and other people as a living historian. There are some cliches you've kind of got to stick with.
Yeah.
Should be playing Queen Victoria this week. I'm not, but you know, there was always a cliche there of how you look. Anyway, yeah. So you need to move. I've lost my train of thought completely, because I'm thinking about not being Queen Victoria.
No, I'm thinking about Victoria now. You've done it to me as well. Yeah.
I'm sure there's something on the website. Anyway, humanity is what I go for. It's telling human stories. I want people to understand the decision-making process, the emotions, the difficulty of leaving your family, or how hard it was to cross the Pyrenees for the 4th time and see the hand of your dead comrade sticking up through the snow. I want people to feel it, but I don't want them to necessarily go, all hail, because they were people like you and me. I wish the tagline had been ordinary people doing extraordinary things, because that is what it is all about. Yes, there are some bleak, horrible stories in here, I'm afraid, because it's S.O.E. It's not all happy ever after. But for me, it is striking that chord of getting the humanity across. That's why I said about a review. I can see half a review on the Scotsman that says, you know, she doesn't pull any punches. These are human stories. Let's not big them up if they don't deserve it. And also let's call them out if they weren't very nice. Matilda Kari was a double agent, a self-serving double agent. There's no two ways around that. So I wanted to get her in because I wanted to show that there were traitors in the midst as well as heroines. It's humanity, it's reality. That's what I'm after. I hate, and I'm sorry to anyone who does it, I hate people who recreate conversations or who say, she thought this. I say, maybe she thought this, maybe she thought that. I don't know what she was thinking. I'm not writing a novel. I'm writing readable nonfiction. And yeah, that's my important thing. Keep it level-headed and straight.
No, that's a rabbit hole about the styles of writing, which is always fascinating. But I think the underlying thing I take away from your work and other people's is, I'm going to use the word grabbiness for a lot of the life as an agent. You know, the not being able to wash as frequent as you want to, and you know, as a woman, you know, just having a clean pair of knickers kind of thing. Is it? It's not the James Bond world, is it? Where you check into a 5-star hotel before going to save the world. These are people who are never relaxed. There's there's always that agent of who's going to, you know, the worry of who's going to betray you, who are you going to speak to, who's going to notice you're out of place, who's watching you, because the interesting thing about the successes of S.O.E., and you know, we talked about the speed with which the Germans rebuilt trains. The Germans put a lot of resources into stopping all this stuff. Absolutely. And their counterintelligence are very, very good. And which is tragic for the lives of the S.O.E. agents who end up in Ravensbrück or wherever it is, but it's resources they're putting into stopping this that they could have been putting somewhere else. That they're putting people with very, very good minds. When I read books about some of these incredibly gifted but awful, evil intelligence German people, I think, Christ, that guy had a fantastic mind. It's a pity he was using it to hound and kill Allied agents, but they were having to go to their best level to stop this stuff. So that is another reason to say that S.O.E. worked, because
it's a very good point.
Germans having to stop it. The Germans didn't just go, well, it's nothing. They took it very seriously.
They did, and I think I've mentioned it in one of my talks with you before, the massage personnel that they utilized on Radio Londres. The Germans thought that was code, and they put their best code breakers to try and crack a code that isn't a code, it's a one-off message. You're right, it's a huge amount of resource that they're putting into that. So they clearly think S.O.E. is a big enough threat to warrant it. Hadn't quite thought it brings us back before, but really good point.
It brings it back, this idea as well, is the blurring of the lines, because it isn't just the S.O.E., it is the resistance, it is the networks of people, and you know, I always like talking about what exactly is resistance anyway. Is if you're publishing an underground newsletter like the people in Guernsey we were talking about last week, which there wasn't an active resistance in the sense of going and blowing stuff up, but they were sharing the real news with people. That's a network of people who are involved in resisting the occupier, but it's not the traditional going up and blowing up trains. And I think S.O.E. is part of this much bigger concept of just
but there's levels of resistance, and there are levels of resistance. It's not just blowing stuff up and shooting stuff down. I was in a little museum in Trondheim the other week. It's forging identity papers. It's listening to the BBC on the wireless and then producing an underground newspaper that has the real stories in it, not the German propaganda. It's publishing pamphlets like Sophie Scholl in Munich, anti-German sentiment, and distributing them. It's carrying something you shouldn't be. Resistance is vast. There are levels of it. we can't really go with what de Gaulle said and say everyone resisted and everybody waved their tricolour and went, yes, we didn't collaborate at all. But there are levels of resistance. In fact, that happens in Denmark as well. I comment at the end of my Danish chapter that they were all really disappointed when liberation came because everybody said they'd resisted. And they were like, never seen you before in my life. Where were you when I was, you know, stuck underground sending messages or whatever it was? So yeah, there are definitely levels of resistance, and it can't be underplayed.
And living in France as I do, it doesn't even fall into you are pro-occupation or anti-occupation. It's 5 years. Your motivations can change. You know, you feel you want to do something at one point, or the tide turns a bit. In 1940, you're kind of a bit of a pragmatist and think, okay, well, I'll just suck it and see, keep on going. But later on, because of the news of RAF raids or something, you decide to be a bit more proactive. It's not a fixed position, but to leave things off, Kate, I want to kind of who is the one person from your new book that is the person you think the wider world should know about? Because you know you do uncover some names who are new to a lot of us. You know, with the F section in France, there were a lot of names of people we've known about for years because of movies. Who's the one woman you think, God, she should be a global superstar in terms of what she did in World War II?
I'm going to choose Haviva Reich, who was Slovakian, and she emigrated to Mandate Palestine, did what they all do, went through agricultural school, worked on a kibbutz, and she joined the Palmach, which was the Jewish fighting organization overseen by the British Army. So she does her training. She loves parachute jumping. She talks about, she asks to go back in the aircraft. And when they're taking another lot of people, she says, can I come again? She absolutely loves it. She jumps into the Banksa Bystrica region, I believe it's pronounced, of Slovakia.
You can tell you've read your audio book recently. Your pronunciation is
really good.
You've been working
you
at
wouldn't
this.
know if I was making it up either.
You have been. It's the confidence with which you're doing it, Kate. It's the fact. I believe it because you're saying it with determination. It might not even
be that. I can't remember. Listen to the audio book. It's right on
languages. 16 different languages.
9 languages.
9. Crikey.
Anyway, right, Haviva, stop. It's a tragic story. She lands with some of her Jewish comrades, and basically they're trying to help the Jews of this area. They're supposed to be helping downed Allied airmen, and she does. I've forgotten the number, but it's vast. She saves a lot of them and helps them out across the border. But while she's there, the Germans occupy, and the anti-Semitism starts. And it's a little bit like the film Defiance. They go out into the woodlands. Most of these Jews that they're with are elderly or they're infirm, but she will not let them be left on their own. And eventually they're overrun by the Germans. They're thrown into prison. She is Jewish. Her comrade is Jewish. They are tortured. They're maltreated. And eventually they are taken out one snowy morning and shot as part of a massacre. And we know this because when the grave was exhumed, she was found in her RAF uniform with a book that she carried with her everywhere, which in my mind was a bit daft. It was called Kibbutz Women. But she had this book and they were able to identify her through that. Hannah Sanesh is not well known outside of the Jewish community, but Haviva is unknown. And she sacrificed everything and she died the most brutal, horrible death. And we hear about the hundreds and thousands and millions of murders committed against the Jews by the Nazis and by the fascist cohorts. And I do Holocaust work as well, as you know, and I very much believe in giving a face to these people and a name and a story if we can. And the fact I've managed to do that, and it's got an S.O.E. link. Yeah. Haviva, go and read her story. She's remarkable. Even the dog agrees.
And it's also, it's so very easy. We're going down a massive rabbit hole with the Holocaust to talk about just victimhood, just the fact that people are being executed and murdered and deported, but some are fighting back. Some are fighting back against that from the beginning, and I think those figures are also worth acknowledging for that reason alone. It's not just people. They obviously they are victims in these cases. You know, they're tragic deaths, but they're not going to their deaths passively, is I think is often the thought. Some people are actively going out there in different countries and trying to make a difference, knowing that their own fate is likely to be tragic. But we will end things there. So, Kate, I love talking to you. It's been fantastic. So, folks, as I said at the beginning, the link to the book is in the description below, or buy it at your favorite bookstore. And as Kate said, it's a good point to remind ourselves to a review.
There it is.
I haven't got a copy yet. It's annoying. I've got Mission France, but I haven't got it yet. But I will get one.
You need one Sunday.
Yeah, I'll get one. So brilliant, folks. I'm back again with Stephen tonight. In the meantime, thank you. And I will see you all again tomorrow. Cheers. Or tonight. So cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Tonight. Bye.